I think in our day and age, it's hard to really see and feel the power of little actions because it feels kind of futile and it's like screaming into a void. Or it's not even screaming, it's like whispering into a void. But, the snowball effect is powerful. If everyone took like one photo of a pollinator and uploaded it, that would be like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of data points added. And I think that's all we got, each other and what we choose to do on a daily basis.
That was Rebecca Louie, Executive Director of the Bee Conservancy. And this is Making It Here, a podcast by Epicenter NYC, where we spotlight the real stories behind entrepreneurs, artists, creators, and business leaders forging their own path. Every week, we dive into the hustle, the setbacks, the small wins that make the big picture possible. And every guest will have something to teach us, because making it here isn't easy. I'm your host, Amber Castillo. Pollinators play a critical role in our food system, but their decline has immediate consequences for food security, public health, and the resilience of ecosystems. The Bee Conservancy was created in response to that reality. What started as a grassroots effort has grown into programs that bring pollinator gardens across the city, provide seeds and support to urban farmers, and engage residents in community science to track bee populations. Today, I'm joined by the Bee Conservancy's Rebecca Louie to hear more about how the organization has expanded since she joined in 2019, the partnerships that have brought unexpected resources to the table, and the importance of asking for help. Her perspective offers lessons for anyone starting out in the nonprofit world or simply looking for meaningful ways to contribute. Let's jump in. Here's my conversation with Rebecca.
My name is Rebecca Louie, and I am the Executive Director at the Bee Conservancy.
If we could kind of start at what brought you to then the Honeybee Conservancy back in 2019, and if there was a moment in particular that made you say, this is the work that I need to do.
So back in the day, there was a lot of concern in general about this phenomenon called colony collapse disorder. Honeybees were disappearing, and I myself was like a New York City girl, not very eco. I had been an entertainment reporter, like all these things that had nothing to do with ecology. I took a job in tech and my soul felt kind of empty. So I started looking for green things to do and just to kind of connect myself back to my soul. And so I started beekeeping. And at the time, there was an opportunity to learn amongst other beekeepers in New York City itself. And there is where I met Guillermo, who is the founder of the Honeybee Conservancy. The Honeybee Conservancy itself was a project that he began. It was driven largely by his upbringing, growing up as a person of color in an urban neighborhood, immigrant community, and realizing the relationship between food security and the health of folks around him. And in that case, where he was, not so many supermarkets, not a lot of healthy foods, what's called a food desert. And because honeybees pollinate 1 in 3 bites of food that we eat, he was like, as a beekeeper himself, let me do something. Can I start an organization that's connecting the health of honeybees to the health of communities? So fast forward, it's 2019. He was like, Rebecca, I'd love for someone to step in and see what they can do with this organization that I've built. And I was like, all right, I'll give it a whirl. And so I came on as the first full-time hire. Since then, the organization has really evolved and grown, and our mission and our work has expanded. So we relaunched as the Bee Conservancy in 2020, so sort of like the height of the pandemic. And really the goal there was pretty simple. It was, how can we leverage the roots and heart of the organization, being community focused, but actually explore working in conservation across all bee species, because honeybees are only 8 of the world's 20,000 plus bee species. And all those other folks flying by, very important. And, in expanding to the Bee Conservancy, we could think about habitat and participation and inclusion and ecosystems very, very differently. So that was more or less the journey of how we got here.
Yeah. And were there certain things you started, experimenting with or really leading newer kinds of efforts with when you took the helm?
Sure. So the 2 really big, exciting areas of focus for us right now are the intersection of habitat development and community science. The habitat development piece is what it sounds like. We are trying to get bee and pollinator friendly gardens in as many places as we can. And that happens both at the infrastructure level and at like the community level, as I've been discussing. So infrastructure wise, we have partners in New York City that include the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, as well as the New York City Housing Authority. And in the case of Port, we're at several sites, which are like industrial intense sites, bridges and tunnels. And we're working with the teams there to build out and maintain these beautiful perennial pollinator friendly gardens. So Port is one of our partners. And in 2024, we started working with resident gardens across NYCHA. And so that's a really exciting opportunity to work both at the infrastructure level, because NYCHA is like the largest housing authority in North America, but also have that community piece where, we're in one community farm in Brooklyn. We are outside of a community center in the Planters, and we have a whole program where like the kids come and water the plants, and we like read our comic book to them. And also there is a lovely group of like senior gardeners that we've like built out like 4 in-ground pollinator beds within a garden that they were already working on. So that feels pretty magical because there everybody has come together for that, right? But in addition, we have other programs like seed distribution. And, I mentioned food security before, and we have a food justice award, which is really exciting for us, where we're partnering with community gardeners and urban farmers, currently in the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, but our hope is to expand, of course, to grow basically the equivalent of pollinator strips, which is an agricultural phenomenon where people like basically plant, wildflowers alongside crops, and it brings literally all the bees to the yard. So in our case, we are encouraging food growing initiatives to have, and we're shipping them, we're kind of helping them design garden spaces, and we're sending them plants, and we're available for mentorship and other training as well. But to get those plants in the ground, because it will bring all these wonderful pollinators while, again, stabilizing like urban spaces that might not have, this wonderful greenery to do the work that Mother Nature intended.
Was there something you wish you would have known when you maybe first started leading the organization, or something that you would have told yourself that folks maybe could take away from that?
So something that I think I've gotten much better at, I would have loved to know from the start, is always ask for what you need, what you want, for help, because people are surprisingly generous with their time, their resources, not always their money, but like, you can get things you need in surprising ways, and you won't know unless you ask and have conversations. So like, don't be shy, I guess, is another way. That's something my dad used to always say, like, don't be shy. Don't be shy. It's perfectly reasonable, professional, and often welcome to share or ask for X, because people often have X in abundance and want to spread it around.
I'm curious about how that partnership came about with the New York and New Jersey Port Authority. I don't necessarily think like Port Authority and pollinators. How did that come about?
One thing that is amazing is when someone cares, right? And they ask a question. And so in terms of the origin of our relationship with the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, someone named Jake Fry, who works at the World Trade Center campus, reached out to us. He personally had an interest in pollinators and pollinator gardens. And he was like, can we do something together? So first, we did some initial consults specifically for Liberty Park, which is on the World Trade Center campus. And actually, it's a raised park. It overlooks the memorial and, is a very sacred space. And so we worked with Jake for a season. We had a couple events. The Girl Scouts came, very cute. And we worked with their landscaping team to install a bunch of native plantings throughout Liberty Park. And so to date, several years later, Liberty Park has installed over 1,300 native plant species, which are perennial and, again, doing this amazing work. And, from the successes that we've had at Liberty Park, met other groups across the agency that were interested. We, at our max, had, I believe, 6 locations active. And it really, again, takes like just the passion of 1 or 2 people and then a few conversations to make these things happen. One thing to mention about the opportunities at something like an agency or a municipal level, every year, these organizations already have a budget line for gardening, plant, land management, period. So what is an exciting opportunity for us is to be like, hey, okay, you have the money allocated. You have the teams that are going to do it. They're going to go out, water, weed, do whatever. Can we play with some of that to try something different, which in theory does save money with these perennial plantings, and you're creating habitat, and there's all this like plus to it, like across all of the concerns that, an agency level, maybe holder of budget and teams might be concerned about. So that's what's really exciting for us, that it's really like one of those win-win-win situations.
And I'm curious also about the award itself. How did that come about, or what's that process like? This is from the Bayer and Monsanto settlement?
Yes. So this is the New York State Pollinator Fund. And, sort of the backstory, like Letitia James had got the settlement, and then great. And they were like, let's give it back to the pollinators. And so for us, the other body of work that I'm really excited to share with you is our focus on community science, which, if you haven't heard of it before, some people historically refer to it as citizen science, but it is the idea that like regular everyday people can get out there and take small actions wherever they are to support the work of scientists. And this is valuable because scientists are few and far between. They have a lot of work to do. Sometimes they have to be in the lab. So how do we leverage the passion or interest or time of regular folks to support their work? So in our case, the thing that we're really focusing on is bee population data, or pollinator population data, really, because bees are fabulous, but there are also like other pollinators involved. Because bees are super small, they are everywhere and hard to find. North America has 4,000 species, talking about New York State specifically, over 415 plus. And in these cases, who's out there looking for them? How do you know who is where? And that's where community science comes in. So in terms of the grant that we received, the program is called Be the Solution. And the idea there is that we are taking community groups and ourselves into all sorts of communities, and where we can, focusing on like the New York Climate Act designated disadvantaged community map, because those are communities that are specifically have been analyzed as being more vulnerable in terms of like climate evolution, et cetera. So DACs is what they're called. And so we are in these communities, basically leading teams of people collecting observational data on pollinator populations there. And there are two apps that we do this with. And it's basically like similar, where there's an AI model that is basically being trained to identify bee species. Because again, if we were relying on scientists to identify bees, it would take forever and ever and ever. But in this case, the combination of the internet, community-based contributions, because people do weigh in on sightings, as well as like AI models, we're able to get pretty accurate IDs on the species flying by. So the question is, why is this important? When you know what's there, then you can take action. And if you know what is not there, you can also take action. While on the one hand, all sorts of scientists are using this data for phenology, trends in phenology, the relationship between plants and animals, and like how things go over time. There's also an opportunity to have community level activation or advocacy, right? Like, there's this funny story from the fall that I love, which I guess Meta was trying to open a giant AI hub. And they put out this article in the fall saying that the location that they had selected, they were not going to move forward with because rare bees were found there. So it's kind of like Mark Zuckerberg 0, bees 1, because someone knew that the bee was there. And that is a very big, powerful thing. And so for us, in focusing on data collection, yes, we're boosting the data sets, but by also moving around in a lot of historically underrepresented neighborhoods, in DACs, we are physically contributing these places and their story to the larger story. So we're trying to bridge the gap. We're trying to broaden the story. And then in finding whatever we find, we'll have a whole analysis part in the winter, which is usually when everything dies down in the field and people can like think and reflect. And honestly, too, like the cuts being made right now in science, the jobs of researchers, people in very vital departments that are focused on ensuring that this planet sticks around so that we can as well, is alarming. And so more and more, it looks like certain initiatives will be in the hands of people, like regular people. And in a way, like even to create backlogs in a good way of information so that when, hopefully scientists and researchers are back in their positions where they can, like they'll have all sorts of juicy data to dig into.
And if you could just share really briefly, like I know you became a master composter and also kind of beekeeping as a hobby is not necessarily something folks just like think, I'm just going to pick this up. So kind of if you could just give a little bit of background of how that all started.
Yeah, I love that. Okay. So yes, I'm a master composter. And yes, I'm a trained beekeeper. But while both of those things started as hobbies, there was a lot of lessons learned and a lot of sort of humbling moments going into it. And in some ways, being a hobbyist is wonderful because your heart is in the right place. But sometimes the outcome, right, is not necessarily like in line with what your initial goals had been. So the short version of that is like, the first time I started a worm bin, which is one way you can compost, you get worms to eat, scraps. Killed them all. It was devastating. It was messy. And it just felt very, very bad because I had the best of intentions and I didn't have the training I needed to do it correctly. So then I was like, fine, I'll take the master composter certification, which is offered by New York City. I'm going to lean in, really do it. And then I learned a lot. And then, things fall. Like I wrote a book and like blah, blah. Similarly, honeybee keeping, I was lucky to be in a pretty rigorous, like I think it was several weeks of training course to learn how to do it. And, I happened to have like this little nook in the Catskills and I was able to do it here. A lot of people, especially recently during the pandemic, turned to beekeeping, this similar sort of wide-eyed wonder that I had had back in the colony collapse disorder days where it's like, oh, I'll do this thing and I'll help. But, it actually is, as a hobbyist, it's a discipline. You need to learn a lot. You need to do a lot. Like it's midsummer and you need to be out there like checking the bees at least like every other week. And you need to know what to look for. Sometimes you have to look more frequently. And it is a lot of work. And I think when people come to the Bee Conservancy and they're like, I want to start a beehive, we often ask, great, why? And then they're like, I really want to help the bees. And we're like, okay, well, did you know that, for example, planting this stuff in your yard or stopping the pesticides or whatever would actually like impact bee health on a much larger level and be about 100 times easier on like your time, your budget, your energy, and then they're all like, wow, great. So the gap there is that people just don't realize there's so many ways to support bees and to like support the environment in general. Because people, again, it's fine. Think of honeybees as the bee. But again, there's thousands and thousands of other bees that live very, very differently. Most bees are solitary. One bee, one tunnel, or one nest, a handful of eggs, right? People don't know that. And so still all those bees pollinate 80% of the world's flowering plants. So, this is just to say, being a hobbyist is so powerful because you have passion. And if the passion is to solve a problem, it can be equally valuable to explore other ways that problem is being solved because it might be chiller for you and you might have a bigger impact if you take like another route to get there.
And what's the most challenging aspect of beekeeping?
I mean, it's a lot. There is a huge amount of education you need to have going into it. It's incredibly, well, I mean, I guess money is relative, but it is not a cheap hobby at all. You physically need to invest the time to like look at your hives week over week and know what depending again at the point of the season, sometimes you can go longer or your expertise level, but you need to be able to know what's going on in there to triage any problems that might be happening as best you can as a beekeeper and still understand that nature is going to take its course sort of despite your best efforts to help it. And so because hobbyists often don't realize like the sort of enormity of the responsibility, that can lead to just, as with any discipline, like not great beekeeping, which has like other downstream effects or problems that it can cause. So
what would you say the Bee Conservancy needs right now from the community? What could you use more of?
The bottom line is that the Bee Conservancy and our planet needs participation, right? And participation means a lot of things. And the good news is every person can participate in a way that's comfortable and like easy to do. People don't know that, so they don't do it. But, participation can be anything from sharing a social media post to participating in an event to planting something outside or watering something that someone else planted, asking it for your schools or your local whatever structure to like think about pollinators or greening or lovely ecological things, to of course like donating, which, directly to organizations that are doing work that you as a giver believe in. But, the thing I really like to emphasize, and frankly, even when I was doing composting, is that we do have the power. And I think in our day and age, it's hard to really see and feel the power of little actions because it feels kind of futile and it's like screaming into a void. Or it's not even screaming, it's like whispering into a void. But, the snowball effect is powerful. The collective contributions of small things does equal a bigger thing. If everyone took like one photo of a pollinator and uploaded it, let's say to iNaturalist and Bee Machine, but if that was everyone, suddenly that would be like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of data points added just once and then walk away and never look at it again, right? And I think that's all we got, each other and what we choose to do on a daily basis.
And is there anything that's coming up for the Bee Conservancy that you're especially excited about?
Yeah, well, to bring it back to Be the Solution and I guess the grant, we're really excited to get people. Look, we're on our phones all day anyway, so why don't we use our phones to take like a couple of pictures for science? So we're really excited about connecting with communities on the ground across New York State who are expanding outside of New York City to do this work, as well as virtually. Like we recently did a training. It was actually a corporate training, and over 100 people showed up and joined the project, and they're collecting data like across the Northeast and as far as like, the Midwest, because, this specific company was like, hey, we have some volunteer hours. How can we do something virtually that galvanizes people locally? And we were like, well, we got a plan for you. So we did this webinar, we did a training, and people actually got out there to do the work, which is incredibly exciting. And for them, it's their volunteer time. And this is what I mean about all these like little opportunities, because a lot of companies have paid volunteer hours. So what if your volunteer hours was walking around with your work bestie at the local park collecting data? And you're yapping away. You can talk and take pictures and edit them and upload it. It's regular life. But wow, what an impact, right? So there are so many opportunities. And so we're really excited about Be the Solution, and we're really excited about community science. And we think it's a really easy way for people to just get involved and to tell the story of their local ecology.
Yeah. And where can folks go to get involved?
Oh, please visit our website at thebeeconservancy.org. There's all sorts of goodies there for you to explore and look at in terms of ways you can get involved.
Thanks for listening. And if you'd like to learn more about the Bee Conservancy or get involved, visit thebeeconservancy.org. That's all for today. Thanks for supporting us as we do our best to support our community. We couldn't do it without you. For more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to our newsletter at epicenter-nyc.com.